Hi guys, thanks for joining us again for the second of our fireside chats. You'll see that we've done a little bit of renovation and I've actually got the fire working now. It's kicking out some serious heat. Well, that just might be Martin. I'm Ben Bennett, I'm the COO for the EMEA region of Omnitude, and today I'm going to be spending time interviewing George W. Bush over here. Clearly not the former president, but I'll let this man introduce himself.
In fact, I just flew in through JFK Airport from America. Martyn Brougham, the COO of the Americas, recently joined the Omnitude crowd, and yeah, looking forward to it.
So Martin is our supply chain guru, has a wealth of experience, which we're going to touch on in a minute. And the purpose of today was to explore supply chain and how Omnitude fits into that process. But also broadly what the technology as a whole, not just our technology, but blockchain, what the future role could be within the vertical of supply chain. So I guess first question really is, how did you end up working with us? What's the background?
Funnily enough, I bumped into Chris 5 years ago working on a DHL supply chain project, supplying the entire police force of the UK with their uniforms and personal protection equipment.
Okay.
But we did an 18-month proposal. It took us 18 months to put it together. And during that time, I had the fortune to meet Chris. Misfortune, some might say. But from there on in, we forged a relationship, and here I am.
COO of the Americas. So tell us about America. What's it like? Clearly you're not American.
It's a big country.
Yeah, well, yeah.
There's a few million or billion, 250 million people. It's a huge market. I've worked in the US off and on since my teenage years. No, not my teenage years. But I've worked there on and off for the last 35 years. My son was born in Chicago and I worked in Chicago. And I've been working in and around the US ever since, to be honest. I love America. No surprise. Thanksgiving next week. Happy Thanksgiving.
So you are heading up the Omnitude operations over in the States. So we're registered over there now. We've got a company in the United States.
We're incorporated in the state of Delaware as Omnitude Incorporated. We head office is in Austin, Texas. And the reason we chose Austin was manyfold, but some of the key reasons. There's 110 blockchain companies in Austin today. We have a great university, University of Texas, where there's 50,000 students, and many of them learning about supply chain and blockchain specifically. High-tech town, a lot of other people there. Google are there, IBM are there. All the big players are in Austin. So it's a good place to be.
In amongst it. Good shout. And have you got any plans to grow out the American offering of Omnitude?
Well, yeah. I mean, we're obviously, clients drive growth, right? I mean, it's not going to just suddenly happen in just because we want it to. So I think the early efforts that we're involved in the US are really trying to make sure clients know what we can offer, making sure they're the right clients. It's a bit like a matchmaking service. You know, we will basically match our services with their requirements.
Cool. So you clearly haven't flown over to the UK just for this interview because I'm not that important to warrant your attention. So why are you over here?
You and I have got a big. You can't remember?
Well, I know. I've got the. They don't know. We've got the meeting.
Okay. So basically, we've got a meeting with a big supply chain operator next week, and first of a few, I think. I've been in touch with a supply chain business in the US. In fact, several. And I think that they're displaying a level of interest which is going to be supportive of what we're doing, and speaks to the fact that we don't imagine people are going to throw away their supply chain systems, that we're going to integrate and work together with them via a middleware.
You've obviously been in the company for a while now and had these conversations with supply chain businesses, what their expectations are, what our expectations and hopes are. I mean, what do you see some of the key changes being for our industry in that space over the next sort of 12, 18 months?
For me, you know, the supply chain is going to become much more compressed in the future, much more integrated and digitized. So what blockchain gives everyone is the opportunity to do that in a much more in a much easier way. Gone are the days of having to interact in the old-fashioned way of purchase orders and invoices. Much more it's going to be about accessing the blockchain, finding out the data about the product and interacting with via the blockchain with these different parties that supply services across the entire end-to-end supply chain. So I think we'll see a much more efficient supply chains in the future, built from the bottom up, built from the consumer out, and making sure that everything that's involved in that supply chain is for the benefit of the consumer. I think we're going to see much more compressed supply chains, much less involvement from a manual processing point of view, much more automation. I think we're looking at revolutionising the supply chain using blockchain.
Okay, and I think when a lot of businesses talk about how they're going to market, building product, it seems that they're absolutely impenetrable and it's a certainty that things are going to happen. I'm very keen on transparency around what we're doing. So what would be quite interesting is to share what you believe some of the early pitfalls or problems as a business we might face in this space could be.
Yeah, I think it's mainly around the cycle of the blockchain industry. We're in the early stages of people adopting, and the early adoption stage is always, is it education, is it training, is it making sure that the early solutions are delivering the correct return on investments and being able to prove that. I think that being involved at the beginning is a good position to be in for the blockchain industry, because we are becoming known as innovators. We will be known as innovators, and we will be part of that revolution. You can't just get involved towards the end of a revolution. It's not a great place to be. So for me, being involved at the very beginning is key, and I think we'll start to shape and understand how we can impact that supply chain business in a big way, in a paradigm shift way. I think that some of the pitfalls are that we'll in choosing to deliver some of the solutions, we've got to be careful that we don't just develop one-off solutions. It's expensive to develop software these days. Blockchain developers are not in great supply, and so it's expensive. And we just got to make sure that whenever we're developing our solutions for the supply chain industry, that it's not just for an individual supply chain, that it's going to be for the benefit of other supply chains as well. And that's a balancing act on the one hand, but on the other hand, it gives us the opportunity to be able to finance that deliverable platform using individual clients' problems and reasons for development.
Okay, thanks, mate. Which leads us nicely on to some of the questions that we've had through our community. So for everyone that has sent in their questions, thank you very much. We've got a long list of questions here that we're going to go through. And I think probably one of the easiest places to start is, what does a supply chain typically involve? Now, we've got a slide that we're going to put on screen now. So do you want to talk us through what does a supply chain typically involve? That would probably help.
Yeah, and this is our view. It's not everyone's view. Some supply chains are quite short. Some supply chains only talk about the logistics element. Some only talk about the warehousing element. What we talk about as being a supply chain is the end-to-end. Everything from producing the product, designing the product even, all the way through to delivery and looking after the reverse logistics as well. Everything in between is a supply chain. In fact, if you think about it, isn't everything a supply chain? Isn't life a supply chain?
Deep.
We don't want to get too philosophical on this, do we? No.
Well, we can.
No, probably not. But seriously, we're talking about prepare, procure, produce and provide. Everything associated with those components and those elements, everything in between is a supply chain. And people talk a lot about digitizing the supply chain. I've been to so many conferences recently where people have stood up, not blockchain conferences, just conferences about supply chain. So many people stand up and they talk about the cloud, talk about Internet of Things. Do you think they talk about blockchain? Not yet. It's starting to happen, but not yet. what's good about this is that we're in the very beginning with it. We're in to be able to take these supply chains and make them more efficient, make them more integrated. And blockchain is a perfect example of being able to benefit from the elements of blockchain that are providing those benefits, rather than trying to throw away legacy systems and implement blockchain as a unique solution.
Which I think is quite interesting you say that the people within supply chain industry aren't talking about the tech, because working in the tech space, you see a number of blockchain businesses that are proudly proclaiming their success stories, but it seems that perhaps that might be marketing spiel or PR as opposed to real world application.
Yeah, I don't think there are that many real world deployed solutions yet, and I think the reason for that is several reasons. But there's been a resistance, I think, for people to employ blockchain because they already have this millions of dollars, millions of pounds all over the world invested in their legacy data systems, and they don't want to throw that away. They don't want to impact that return on investment that they've already deployed. But what's good about blockchain is we're not looking at replacing these warehouse management systems, these transport management systems. We're looking to take the valuable data that those systems give you, but put it into a blockchain to get the benefits of blockchain.
So you talk about there with the integrations, and I mean clearly on this slide there's the nice white arrow of the middleware layer. Can you expand out on that a little bit for us?
Sure. I think for me, the fact that we've got a middleware layer is the key element. Being able to export data from warehouse management systems, these legacy data systems, and put them on the blockchain is a fundamental requirement and a fundamental part of our ecosystem. It's not just us that's going to be able to do that, but by deploying the Omnitude ecosystem itself, every person in the supply chain industry will be able to generate apps that speak to the individual supply chains that are trying to be made more efficient. And that's unique, as I can see it. There's no one else doing that in the industry right now. And I think that's where the play is going to be. That's where the big benefit's going to be coming from.
I agree. So let's talk about those benefits. So we've got a question here that says, which parts of blockchain will be useful in the supply chain and why? I mean, benefits galore, you can talk about that all day long. Where do you see the key wins being?
Yeah, and we haven't got all day, right?
We don't have all day.
Well, I think there's several areas. Certainly, as you look at the chart that was just put up previously, one of the key elements of procuring products and materials is around this whole element of sustainability, and making sure that the provenance of the product and materials is being protected and being measured. At the end of the day, the people who are going to make a decision on what's right for them are the consumer. If you know that the provenance of a product has been proven to be coming from an audited, a fully audited, a fully protected, a fully sustainable business, and you can prove it, then you're more likely to want to buy that product, especially the millennials. I think you heard in the last video, when you were talking with John, Ben, you referred to the fact that this new group of people, the millennials, are much more socially aware and much more socially conscious.
Sure.
That's where in a supply chain, if you can prove where the product's coming from, people are going to take note of that, and it's the consumer that ultimately will make that decision.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's one element. I think another element is being able to handle quality assurance in a completely different way to the way it's handled at the moment. When you look at quality and quality assurance, Ben, there are certain things and certain elements of it that really are very much built around milestones. When a product gets to the factory gates, it's checked. When a product gets on the boat, it's checked and counted, and perhaps sample checked as well. When it arrives in the warehouse, it's checked. So this constant milestone progress. What happens in the middle? What happens while it's in transit? What happens before it gets to the factory gates? And this is where Internet of Things starts being able to deliver elements of information and data on a much more frequent, much more in-transit environment. And rather than waiting until it gets to the checkpoint before you find that actually those products are spoiled or those products are damaged, that can be checked along the way, along the journey. And in Formula One, where we're obviously involved, people are already starting to use pressure-sensitive gauges for things like ceramic brakes, which obviously get up to huge temperatures. If there's a hairline crack because that was dropped in transit, wouldn't it be nice to know it was dropped in transit to check whether there has been a fracture, rather than wait until it gets on the car and then finding out too late? Obviously, the insurance industry is predicated on making sure that these things just don't happen. What happens if you could prove that that product hadn't been dropped?
But this is a great thing as well, because it's not just blockchain. It's an adoption of a number of technologies to do good.
It's a blended solution.
Yeah.
And we will use. We're not just a blockchain company. At the end of the day, Omnitude is delivering solutions that are going to improve supply chains, and that will be involving Internet of Things. It will be involving machine learning. It will be involving artificial intelligence. All the elements that will be blended to deliver this solution, and they're not spot solutions. That's the other thing. I think what we see in the industry today is there's quite a lot of spot solutions where it'll address one small element and component of the supply chain. We will deploy solutions piece by piece. It's not a big bang. We don't suddenly have this utopia where we've got an entire end-to-end solution in blockchain yet. We're busy developing it, but every box on that diagram that you saw ultimately will be coloured a different colour because it will be blockchain enabled. And we're starting with Omnitude Identity. We will work through every component of the supply chain. We and our partners and you as part of the industry to deliver that fully enabled supply chain. But ultimately, it'll be all the above. Everything will be quality checked. All the provenance will be proven, and it's all about. We talked a lot about trust economy. If you can trust someone that they've done what they said they did, to me, that's just a huge bonus of the blockchain enablement.
Fair. So you mentioned there a couple of examples, ceramic brakes. What other examples have you got where these benefits might be associated with?
Sure. I think when we look at food, there's some prime examples out there already. Walmart's the oft-quoted example of where they're able to define if there's been a part of their supplier base has delivered a bad product, or an out-of-date product, or the wrong product. Where we see food provenance being highly important, again, relating back to the fact that it's the consumers that are going to be deciding whether this is important or not. When you look at provenance of the food on your plate, if you can prove, for example, for some more high-class Michelin grade or in-flight jet service dinners and food services, wherever you start to see that, and the consumer is a sophisticated palate, then this farm-to-plate environment where you can prove whether that fish was caught in a certain river matters to some people. And then people have become much more discerning about where that product has come from. And certainly blockchain helps you be able to prove where it is produced, and then track and trace it all the way through the supply chain until it ends up on that plate. So that's definitely in the food environment. That's definitely an environment where it's going to be quite important to be able to monitor everything from the creation of the product all the way through to the delivery to the consumer. And again, it's all about consumers. They're the ones who are going to be making these decisions. They're the ones who are going to be benefiting from the blockchain experience.
Absolutely. So there are obviously a lot of companies in this space. We're not unique in the fact that we're the only blockchain business. There are a number of firms also looking at the technology for themselves, and with that comes adoption of this tech. And I guess as more and more enterprise level businesses become familiar with the technology, what do you see the opportunities or the threats are for a business like Omnitude in that situation?
Well, look, I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we thought that we could change the industry overnight. We don't believe that, and nor should we. I think the importance of getting some of the bigger players who are already entering the market, Oracle, IBM have obviously been very established in this environment. Oracle only, 2 weeks ago announced some of their products. we're happy for them to be starting to play in the space. They're the ones who are going to use their clout to get standards produced. They're the ones who are going to be able to move and force governments to adopt. They're the ones who are going to make sure that the banks are following and financing some of the new solutions that are going to be deployed. We won't necessarily be hanging on their coattails, don't get me wrong. We have innovation, and being a small company, we've got agility. And that's something the big players don't have. What we want to be able to do is to work with the big players to make sure that the Omnitude solutions are being adopted where it makes sense. And as I said before, middleware is just a huge, important component of the supply chain environment.
Indeed. We've got here a question that actually is something that I come across quite a lot when speaking with these enterprise businesses, is a lot of them are now educated in the ways of the platform and the technology, but more skeptical about the token or the cryptocurrency element to how some of these technologies do work. I mean, what do you think is going to be a conversation that needs to be had to help these supply chain businesses overcome a phobia, if you like, of cryptocurrencies themselves?
Look, I think there's a two-pronged approach here. I think, first of all, there's an education required to make sure that there is this distance between the cryptocurrency market and the financial markets that it supports, and supply chain and tokenization. I think they're very distinctly different and very separated, but it'll take time to educate the market on that. I think that to focus on the important element, which is the tokenization in the supply chain environment, I think smart contracts is where tokenization is really important and really vital. I mean, in many different supply chains, there are upwards of 30, 40 different players who are just involved in transactions between the parties. When you look at port authorities, customs, logistics companies, that's one element and one component, and there are upwards of 15 to 20 people involved in that environment. So rather than the old paperwork, generating faxes, who still has a fax machine? Well, there's a lot of them in the supply chain business. I think probably the supply chain business is keeping fax machines companies going and profitable. But for me, it's all about disintermediation. Shortening the supply chain, shortening the length of that supply chain is made possible by doing these exchanges of tokens and automatic payments of those tokens using the smart contract environment. I think the number of people who touch the product from beginning to end typically involves some purchase order, an invoice, a query, often queries, and then delivery notes, etc. And again, getting rid of that paperwork is key to, and vitally important to the supply chain efficiency in the future. So for me, the smart chain, the smart token, the smart contract using the smart tokens is a vital component of that supply chain. Eliminating waste, eliminating inefficiencies, and just shortening the length of the supply chain. They're key elements of how we see the tokenization being used.
Nice. So you mentioned earlier around, isn't supply chain involved in almost everything that we do? We've got a question here from one of our community members that is wanting to understand how blockchain or Omnitude will work and how supply chain will be used in the hospitality industry, as an example. Have you got any ideas around how, from a traditional, let's get something from A to B, how it's going to work in hospitality specifically? Yeah,
I think everything, I actually do believe that everything's a supply chain. From making a cup of tea in the morning, you've got to make sure the product's available, that it's, the vessel for putting the hot water in is there. Everything's a supply chain. I mean, it sounds nerdy, but it really is. But in the hospitality industry specifically, I think we're already engaged in a project which probably surfaces quite a few of the benefits of how blockchain works and can benefit in the hospitality environment. The government of Malta recently commissioned us to discover what was going on in their transportation sector. And in the transportation industry in Malta, they've got the bus systems, which are heavily used. They've got taxi systems, which are state controlled, and they've got ferries between the island of Gozo and Malta itself. what they want to do, again, coming back to the strength and power of the consumer making a choice and giving them a choice, is they want to join up that systematic approach to the three, at the moment, very siloed industries that I mentioned. Rather than have them separated, they want to have them integrated, and they want to give the consumer the ability to join those three elements together. And so rather than just look at a bus journey from A to B, and then a ferry connecting from A to B, and then a taxi from B to C, they want to try and make sure that the consumer has the opportunity to understand when that bus arrives at the ferry terminal, when that ferry terminal, when that ferry leaves for the next sailing, and look at optimizing the journey for the consumer. In a blockchain, by writing the right information into the blockchain from GPS satellites, you can join those journeys together. And they're already equipped to be able to do that. They have GPS positioning on their buses, their taxis and their ferries, but they're not using the power of blockchain to join them and integrate them all together. We've got the opportunity to make a big difference to the consumer, the general tourist and the traveller, to be able to join those journeys together like never before. And again, hospitality is all about the joined up approach. You know, I can remember the days, and you're probably too young, Ben, but I can remember the days when package holidays were around, where all that burden of having a complete package holiday was done for you. You know, these days we all want to go on the internet, get the cheapest flight, the cheapest journey from the airport to the hotel, the cheapest hotel, or the best hotel that matches your needs. We want choice, but with choice has come a definite collapse of the supply chain. What blockchain gives you the opportunity to join it all back together again as required for each individual consumer to be able to take the benefit from. And as I say, we're already working on one project to do that. We see many more coming around in the future.
Great. You mentioned the bus system, for example, have GPS positioning devices. Thank you very much. And ultimately, for any supply chain, there's going to be a number of tracking devices, temperature, GPS, whatever it might be, feeding into the blockchain, almost like these feedback mechanisms that you spoke about. Do you want to touch a little bit more about what our plans as Omnitude are to create those sensors or use those sensors?
So on the one hand, there's the Omnitude ID environment for these devices. The other situation is the devices themselves. There's no way in the world we're necessarily going to start creating our own devices unless there is something that's unique that we can't get and isn't available yet in the market. So things like 2D barcodes, RFID tags, NFC tags, all readily available. We can encode them using whatever system we would be using. And again, individual supply chains have individual requirements. It's things like the ability to identify down to molecular level, marking of liquids, marking of gases and marking of certain solids. That's where perhaps the technology hasn't yet caught up with the requirement. It's starting to happen. You know, reading recently, some patents have been issued in Australia for individual molecular tags for individual individual liquids, and that's quite groundbreaking. And as we start to imagine supply chains in the future, then it won't just be supply chains for the product itself, but the individual components of those, where liquid might be an individual component of, say, a food stuff of a food product. Then I think we will start to see us being able to go back in the chain. Look, we're not going to be innovating on everything on every front. But there will be in situations where we will want to, just to keep ahead of the game.
Sure. I mean, we've now got a list of some sort of quick fire questions. I mean, there's a lot. So if I rattle through them, sure, we could have some yes, no's, maybes, indifference, see where we go. How many supply chain companies are you in talks with at the moment?
3 or 4 in the US and 3 or 4 in Europe.
Would the supply chain include physical units for monitoring temperature and other measurables? I think
Yes.
we've covered that, yeah. Will there be an app where you can scan any barcode or tag and find the entire history of an object?
Already there.
Perfect. A scan's going to cost any money?
There'll be token exchanges.
Do you have a certain type of Omnitude ID in order to see the supply chain history?
Well, we use Indy. It's going to become the standard, and certainly Sovereign, we're waiting to find out whether they're going to get the backing and support they need from the industry.
Okay. And within the supply chain environment, is it going to be built into the existing Omnitude ID, or is there going to be a separate application or way of access? Built in. Perfect. Looking at time frames for having a supply chain tracking system go live, what are your thoughts on that?
Q1 next year.
That quick. Beautiful. Is it going to be done on Hyperledger Fabric?
Yep. Well, we use different Hyperledger products, but certainly Fabric is the main key one, yes.
How will monitoring the supply chain drive customers to eCom usage and Omnitude?
Well, I think just basically the consumer has the choice, and it's up to the consumer. If we make ourselves attractive to consumer, then we'll be the system of choice.
Always the way. What benefits are there to vendors by using Omnitude to track products at what would probably be more cost to them?
You've got to look at the total cost of the supply chain. It's not just, you can't just look at one individual component and say it's going to be more expensive. There will be elements that will be more expensive, but you know what? The savings that will accrue will give that return on investment manyfold. Awesome.
Well, I think, you know, from just having this conversation now, I've certainly learned a lot already. I mean, it's very much your world. The idea that a supply chain exists everywhere is going to be problematic for a business like ours, because you want to go and try and fix everything. And again, something I alluded to in the last video is, you know, just because we can doesn't mean that we should. And I think, you know, understanding where our focus should be and meeting with these supply chain businesses early next week and having these wider conversations means that we need to start to focus our attention and make sure that what we're doing is for the benefit of the consumer, but also there's a commercial benefit for both ourselves and our clients. We are more than happy to keep answering questions, so you can find our Telegram chat. We're always active in there. We're across all social media platforms and email as well that you can find on our website. So listen, I just want to thank my colleague and father and former ex-president of the United States. No, in all seriousness, Martyn, I appreciate you giving up your time to have a chat, and hopefully you guys have learned a little bit about supply chain and blockchain and what that looks like. Keep the questions coming. We'll make ourselves available to you, and then we'll let you know about the next fireside chat and who's going to be involved.
And hopefully by then we'll have some partnerships with some of the supply chain companies that we're meeting at the moment.
Wouldn't that be lovely?
Wouldn't it indeed?
Awesome. Thanks a lot, mate. Cheers, guys.
Bye.